Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of royal tradition echo through marble halls, a storm was brewing that would test the very foundation of the modern monarchy. What started as whispered concerns in private chambers would explode into a confrontation so intense that it would leave the queen consort sobbing before the very guards sworn to protect her dignity. This is the untold story of how King Charles III made the most controversial decision of his reign, one that would forever change the relationship between crown and family, duty and love. In the shadows of power, where loyalty is currency and silence is golden, some secrets are too explosive to remain buried. The day everything changed began like any other at the palace, but it would end with tears, broken hearts, and a royal decree that no one saw coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III sat in his private study, surrounded by the weight of centuries-old tradition and the burden of modern expectations. His weathered hands held a file that had been delivered to him just hours earlier, marked with the highest level of security clearance. The contents within would soon shatter the carefully constructed peace he had worked so hard to build since ascending to the throne. Charles had always known that being king would require difficult decisions, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The file contained detailed reports from palace security, financial investigators, and private detectives that painted a disturbing picture of activities involving members of Camilla's extended family. As he read through page after page of evidence, his face grew increasingly grave. The Parker Bowles family, once welcomed into the royal fold through his marriage to Camilla, had apparently been exploiting their royal connections in ways that threatened the very integrity of the crown. The investigation had begun 3 months earlier when anonymous tips reached the palace security team. Someone had been selling stories to tabloid newspapers, revealing intimate details about royal family gatherings, private conversations, and even security protocols. Initially, the palace suspected disgruntled staff members or overly ambitious journalists with palace connections. However, as the investigation deepened, the trail led to an uncomfortable truth that Charles had hoped never to face. Camilla's younger brother, Mark Parker Bowles, had been at the center of a sophisticated scheme that involved selling royal access to wealthy businessmen and foreign dignitaries. He had been charging substantial fees for what he called royal introductions, promising investors and socialites the opportunity to meet members of the royal family at private events. These meetings were not official royal engagements, but rather carefully orchestrated encounters at social gatherings where Mark would position his paying clients to appear in photographs with royalty, creating the impression of official endorsement or friendship. The scheme went far deeper than simple social climbing. Mark had established what investigators called a royal access network that included Camilla's sister Annabelle Elliott, her son Tom Parker Bowles, and even some distant relatives who had gained prominence through their royal connections. They had created a web of influence that stretched from London's most exclusive clubs to international business conferences, all built on the foundation of their family's relationship with the king. Tom Parker Bowles, despite his successful career as a food critic and author, had allegedly been accepting payments from restaurant chains and food companies in exchange for arranging informal meetings with his stepfather during private dining events. These companies believed they were securing royal endorsement for their products, though no such endorsement was ever officially given. The ambiguity was intentional, allowing Tom to collect substantial fees while maintaining plausible deniability about any official royal support. Annabelle Elliott's interior design business had flourished in recent years, securing contracts worth millions of pounds from clients who believed her royal connections would provide them with access to exclusive royal commissions or recommendations. She had allegedly promised potential clients that her relationship with Queen Camilla would lead to invitations to royal events or even the possibility of royal warrants for their businesses. While some clients did receive such invitations, investigators discovered that these were often arranged through back channels and represented a misuse of royal influence for personal financial gain. The most damaging revelation concerned Camilla's ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles. Though divorced from Camilla for decades, Andrew had maintained friendly relations with the royal family and had been using this connection to advance his business interests in the military consulting sector. He had established a company that promised to provide strategic insights to defense contractors, heavily implying that his knowledge came from privileged access to royal and military intelligence. Several international clients had paid substantial retainers believing they were gaining access to classified or sensitive information about British military policy and Royal Perspectives on International Affairs. Charles felt a deep sense of betrayal as he absorbed these revelations. He had welcomed Camilla's family into the royal fold with open arms, understanding that marrying her meant accepting her relatives as part of the extended royal family. He had hoped that their inclusion would help modernize the monarchy and make it more relatable to ordinary British families. Instead, it appeared that some of them had viewed their royal connections as a business opportunity rather than a privilege to be protected and respected. The King's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, had been coordinating the investigation with the utmost discretion. He understood the delicate nature of the situation and the potential for enormous public scandal if the information became public. The monarchy had already weathered numerous storms in recent decades, from the Diana years to Prince Andrew's troubles, and another major scandal could prove devastating to public confidence in the institution. Sir Clive had recommended a quiet resolution that would allow the family members to distance themselves from these activities without admitting wrongdoing. This approach would protect both the monarchy's reputation and Camilla's personal relationships with her family. However, Charles felt that such a solution would be insufficient given the severity of the breaches of trust and the potential ongoing risk to the crown's reputation. The evidence showed that the exploitation of royal connections was not a recent development, but had been building gradually over the years since Charles and Camilla's marriage. What had started as innocent mentions of royal connections in business contexts had evolved into a systematic monetization of their family relationship with the monarchy. The investigators estimated that collectively, Camilla's family members had generated hundreds of thousands of pounds through these activities, with some individual contracts worth tens of thousands of pounds. Charles understood that confronting this situation would mean confronting Camilla directly, and he dreaded the conversation that lay ahead. His wife had been a source of strength and stability throughout his reign, and he knew that learning about her family's activities would devastate her. Camilla had always been fiercely protective of her family and had worked hard to ensure they were included and respected within royal circles. She had no knowledge of these business activities and would likely feel personally betrayed by her relatives' actions. The king also recognized the broader implications of this situation for the monarchy's relationship with the British public. The royal family was expected to be above reproach and to represent the highest standards of integrity and service. Any perception that family members were profiting from their royal connections would undermine public trust and provide ammunition for Republican critics who argued that the monarchy was an outdated institution serving the interests of the privileged few rather than the nation as a whole. As Charles prepared for the difficult conversations ahead, he reflected on the loneliness of leadership and the burden of making decisions that would affect not only his personal relationships but the future of an institution that had served Britain for over 1,000 years. He knew that whatever action he took would have consequences that would ripple through his family, the monarchy, and the nation for years to come. The morning was drawing to a close, and Charles knew he could no longer postpone the inevitable. He instructed Sir Clive to arrange a private meeting with Camilla that afternoon, followed by separate meetings with her family members over the coming days. The decisions he was about to make would test the bonds of marriage, family, and duty in ways he had never imagined possible. As he closed the file and prepared to face one of the most challenging days of his reign, Charles understood that the next few hours would determine whether the monarchy could weather another storm or whether this scandal would inflict wounds from which it might never fully recover. The afternoon meeting between King Charles and Queen Camilla took place in the Blue Drawing Room, a space that had witnessed countless royal conversations throughout history. The ornate surroundings, with their gold leaf details and priceless artwork, seemed to mock the gravity of the situation as Charles struggled to find the right words to begin what would be the most difficult conversation of their marriage. Camilla entered the room with her characteristic warm smile, expecting perhaps a discussion about upcoming royal engagements or family matters. She had noticed Charles seemed unusually distant during their morning coffee, but attributed it to the usual pressures of his royal duties. As she settled into the silk-upholstered chair across from her husband, she could never have imagined that the next hour would fundamentally alter their relationship and challenge everything she thought she knew about her family. Charles began carefully, explaining that palace security had been investigating some irregularities involving family members and their business activities. As he spoke, Camilla's expression gradually shifted from confusion to concern to outright alarm. She initially thought he was referring to some minor protocol breach or perhaps overzealous use of royal titles in business contexts. However, As Charles detailed the extent and sophistication of the schemes involving her relatives, Camilla's world began to crumble. The revelation about her brother Mark's royal access network hit her like a physical blow. Mark had always been ambitious and entrepreneurial, but Camilla had assumed his business success was built on his own merit and connections from his military career. To learn that he had been systematically selling access to royal events and exploiting her position as queen consort felt like a betrayal that cut to her very core. She had trusted him implicitly and had even recommended him for inclusion in various royal functions, never suspecting that he viewed these invitations as business opportunities. When Charles described Tom Parker Bowles' alleged activities involving restaurant chains and food companies, Camilla felt a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. Tom had always been her pride and joy, a successful author and critic who had built his own career in the culinary world. She had been delighted when food companies began showing interest in his work, viewing it as recognition of his talent. To learn that some of this success might be tainted by inappropriate use of royal connections devastated her maternal pride and made her question how well she truly knew her own son. The information about her sister Annabelle's interior design business particularly stung because Camilla had been so proud of Annabelle's success and had genuinely believed it was based entirely on her professional skills and artistic vision. Camilla had occasionally mentioned Annabelle's work to friends and acquaintances, thinking she was simply supporting her sister's legitimate business. Now she realized that these innocent recommendations might have been interpreted as royal endorsements and used to secure lucrative contracts under false pretenses. Perhaps most shocking was the revelation about her ex-husband Andrew Parker Bowles and his military consulting activities. Although they had been divorced for decades, Camilla had maintained an amicable relationship with Andrew and had welcomed his occasional presence at royal events as a gesture of modern family unity. The idea that he had been leveraging these interactions to advance his business interests in the defense sector felt like a fundamental violation of trust and an exploitation of her goodwill. As Charles continued to present the evidence, Camilla found herself questioning not just her family's actions but her own judgment and ability to read people she had loved and trusted for decades. She began to wonder whether there had been signs she had missed, conversations that should have raised red flags, or moments when she should have been more cautious about her family's business activities. The guilt and self-doubt threatened to overwhelm her as she contemplated how her naivety might have enabled these schemes. Charles could see the devastation in his wife's eyes as she processed the information. He had hoped to present the facts gently and provide her with support as she came to terms with her family's actions. However, he also needed to make clear that the situation required immediate and decisive action to protect the monarchy's reputation and integrity. The conversations that followed were among the most painful of their relationship as they grappled with the conflict between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Camilla's first instinct was to defend her family members, suggesting that perhaps the evidence was incomplete or that their actions had been misunderstood. She proposed that they could address the situation privately, asking her relatives to cease these activities and make any necessary apologies or restitutions. This approach would allow them to resolve the matter quietly while preserving family relationships and avoiding public scandal. However, Charles had already considered this option and concluded that it would be insufficient given the scope and duration of the activities in question. The palace's legal advisors had warned that half measures could actually increase the monarchy's legal and reputational risks if evidence of these schemes eventually became public. If it appeared that the royal family had known about these activities and failed to take decisive action, the damage to their credibility would be far greater than if they addressed the situation proactively and transparently. The king explained to Camilla that he would need to implement immediate restrictions on her family members' access to royal events and functions. This would include removing them from guest lists for upcoming engagements, rescinding any honorary positions or titles they might hold, and establishing clear protocols to prevent future exploitation of royal connections. While these measures would not necessarily become public immediately, they represented a fundamental change in how Camilla's family would be treated within royal circles. Camilla struggled to accept the necessity of these restrictions, arguing that punishing her entire family for the actions of some members was unfair and would create unnecessary family tensions. She pleaded with Charles to consider a more graduated approach that would allow her to address the issues with her relatives personally before implementing formal sanctions. She believed that once her family members understood the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences for the monarchy, they would voluntarily cease these activities and take steps to repair any damage. Charles sympathized with his wife's position, but remained firm in his conviction that the situation required immediate and comprehensive action. He explained that the monarchy's survival depended on maintaining public trust, and that any perception of favoritism or special treatment for royal family members would undermine the institution's credibility. He reminded Camilla that they had both accepted the responsibility of putting duty before personal preferences when they married, and that this situation represented the ultimate test of that commitment. The emotional tension in the room reached its peak when Charles informed Camilla that he had already made the decision to implement the restrictions and that she would need to support these measures publicly, even if she disagreed with them privately. This ultimatum forced Camilla to confront the reality that her husband was speaking not just as her spouse, but as the monarch whose duty to the nation superseded his personal relationships, including their marriage. Camilla requested time to speak with her family members before the restrictions were announced, hoping to give them an opportunity to explain their actions or present information that might mitigate the situation. Charles agreed to a brief delay but made clear that the restrictions would be implemented regardless of what explanations her family might offer. The evidence was too comprehensive and the risks too significant to allow personal considerations to override institutional necessities. As their meeting concluded, both Charles and Camilla understood that their relationship had been fundamentally altered by these revelations and decisions. The trust and partnership that had sustained them through the challenges of public life had been tested in ways they had never anticipated. While their marriage would survive this crisis, the easy intimacy and shared confidence they had enjoyed would need to be rebuilt on new foundations that acknowledged the sometimes competing demands of personal loyalty and royal duty. The coming days would bring additional challenges as Camilla prepared to confront her family members with the evidence against them and the consequences they would face. She knew these conversations would be among the most difficult of her life, as she struggled to balance her roles as sister, mother, ex-wife, and queen consort while navigating the complex emotions of betrayal, disappointment, and institutional responsibility that now defined her daily reality. The next morning brought the arduous task of confronting Camilla's family members individually. Charles had insisted that these meetings take place at Buckingham Palace rather than in more informal settings, emphasizing the official nature of the discussions and the gravity of the situation. The formal environment would make clear that these were not family conversations, but rather institutional responses to serious breaches of royal protocol and public trust. Mark Parker Bowles arrived first, his usual confident demeanor faltering as he was escorted not to the family quarters, but to one of the palace's formal meeting rooms. The setting was deliberately imposing, with its portraits of previous monarchs looking down disapprovingly, and the heavy mahogany furniture creating an atmosphere of judgment and consequence. When Camilla entered the room alongside Sir Clive Alderton and the palace's head of security, Mark began to understand the seriousness of his situation. The presentation of evidence against Mark was methodical and devastating. Palace investigators had compiled records of his business communications, financial transactions, and client testimonials that painted a comprehensive picture of his exploitation of royal connections. Screenshots of emails showed Mark promising clients exclusive access to royal circles and unprecedented networking opportunities with the highest levels of British society. Bank records revealed payments ranging from thousands to tens of thousands of pounds for various levels of royal introduction services. Mark's initial response was defensive, arguing that he had never explicitly claimed to offer official royal endorsements, and that his clients had simply misunderstood the nature of his services. He maintained that he was merely facilitating social introductions at events he had legitimate invitations to attend, and that any business relationships that developed were between his clients and other guests, not involving the royal family directly. However, the evidence showed a more calculated approach than Mark was willing to admit. Marketing materials for his services had carefully worded descriptions that strongly implied official royal backing without technically making false claims. He had developed a sophisticated understanding of how to exploit the ambiguity surrounding royal connections while maintaining plausible deniability about his actual authority or influence. The most damaging evidence came from recorded conversations with potential clients where Mark had been more explicit about his services and the access he could provide. In one recording, he had promised a wealthy American businessman that a substantial payment would guarantee a private dinner with key members of the royal family, and that photographs from such an event would open doors across Europe and beyond. Another recording captured him assuring a Middle Eastern investor that his connections could facilitate understanding and cooperation with British government policies affecting the investor's business interests. Camilla watched her brother's composure crumble as the evidence mounted. She saw him transition from confident denial to desperate justification to something approaching panic as he realized the scope of the investigation and the certainty of the consequences he would face. The brother she had loved and trusted appeared to transform before her eyes into someone she barely recognized, someone who had cynically exploited their family relationship for financial gain. When Mark attempted to appeal directly to Camilla, suggesting that his activities had actually enhanced the royal family's reputation by demonstrating their accessibility and connection to successful business leaders, her response was swift and decisive. She made clear that his actions represented a betrayal not just of royal protocol, but of her personal trust and the values she thought they shared as siblings. The pain in her voice was evident as she explained how his schemes had jeopardized her position and forced her husband to question the judgment of everyone in her family. Tom Parker Bowles's meeting later that afternoon proved equally uncomfortable, though his approach was markedly different from his uncle's defensive posturing. Tom had always prided himself on his professional integrity and had built his career on the foundation of honest criticism and expertise in the culinary world. When confronted with evidence of his alleged activities involving restaurant chains and food companies, his reaction was one of genuine surprise and mounting horror as he realized how his actions had been perceived. The evidence against Tom was more subtle but no less serious. While he had not established a formal business offering royal access like his uncle, he had accepted substantial speaking fees and consulting arrangements from companies that had specifically cited his royal connections as reasons for engaging his services. Email exchanges showed company executives discussing how Tom's stepfather relationship with the king could provide their brands with credibility and prestige that money can't normally buy. Tom's defense was that he had simply accepted legitimate business opportunities in his field and had never promised or delivered specific royal endorsements. He argued that his success was based on his published work, television appearances, and genuine expertise in food and restaurant criticism. However, the investigation revealed that several companies had paid him fees well above standard rates for similar services from other food critics, suggesting that his royal connections were indeed a significant factor in their decision to work with him. The most troubling aspect of Tom's situation was that some clients had interpreted his involvement as tantamount to royal endorsement of their products or services. Several companies had used his participation in their events or consultation on their offerings as marketing tools, implying to consumers and investors that their products had received approval or recommendation from royal family circles. While Tom had not explicitly authorized this use of his involvement, he had also not taken steps to clarify the limitations of his authority or to prevent such misrepresentations. Camilla found Tom's situation particularly heartbreaking because she could see his genuine distress at learning how his professional activities had been perceived and exploited. Unlike Mark's calculated exploitation of royal connections, Tom's involvement appeared to stem from naivety about how his royal relationships could be misinterpreted and misused by others. However, the impact on the royal family's reputation was similar regardless of his intentions, and the consequences would need to be equally serious. Annabelle Elliott's meeting proved to be the most emotionally challenging for Camilla. As her sister and closest family confidant, Annabelle's alleged activities felt like the deepest personal betrayal. The evidence against Annabelle showed a pattern of behavior that had evolved gradually over years, beginning with innocent mentions of her royal connections and developing into more systematic exploitation of her position as the Queen Consort's sister. Interior design contracts worth hundreds of thousands of pounds had been secured partially on the basis of client expectations that working with Annabelle would provide them with access to royal commissions or recommendations. Several clients had specifically mentioned in their communications that they viewed their relationship with Annabelle as a pathway to potential royal warrants or opportunities to work on royal properties. While Annabelle had never been in a position to deliver such opportunities, she had not always been quick to clarify the limitations of her influence or connections. The investigation revealed that Annabelle had sometimes scheduled client meetings at venues or times that would maximize the likelihood of casual encounters with royal family members. These coincidental meetings had been presented to clients as examples of her close relationship with the royal family and her ability to facilitate informal introductions that could benefit their businesses. Several clients had interpreted these encounters as implicit endorsements of their work or characters by the royal family members they met. When confronted with this evidence, Annabelle's response was deeply emotional. She insisted that she had never intended to mislead clients about her influence or authority within royal circles. She argued that she had simply been trying to build her business while being proud of her family connections, and that she had not realized how her actions might be interpreted or exploited by others. She expressed genuine remorse for any damage her activities might have caused to the royal family's reputation. However, Camilla struggled to accept Annabelle's claims of innocence, pointing to specific instances where her sister appeared to have deliberately created situations designed to impress clients with her royal connections. The evidence suggested a level of calculation that went beyond mere pride in family relationships and indicated a conscious strategy to monetize her position as the Queen Consort's sister. The confrontation with Andrew Parker Bowles was arranged separately and proved to be perhaps the most complex of all the family meetings. Despite their divorce decades earlier, Andrew and Camilla had maintained a cordial relationship that had been viewed as a model of modern family cooperation. Their ability to coexist peacefully and even socially had been seen as evidence of the royal family's evolution and adaptability. Andrew's alleged activities in the military consulting sector represented a particularly serious breach because they involved potential national security considerations. His company had marketed itself to international clients as having access to insider knowledge about British military policy and strategic thinking. While Andrew had never claimed to have access to classified information, the implication that his royal connections provided him with privileged insights into government decision-making raised concerns about both the monarchy's political neutrality and potential security risks. The evidence against Andrew included client testimonials praising his unique perspective on British military affairs and his ability to provide context and understanding that goes beyond publicly available information. Several contracts had been secured with foreign governments and defense contractors who believed they were gaining access to intelligence or insights that would not be available through normal diplomatic or commercial channels. When confronted with this evidence, Andrew's response was pragmatic rather than emotional. He acknowledged that his marketing materials might have been ambiguous about the source and nature of his expertise, but argued that he had never provided classified information or violated any specific laws or regulations. He maintained that his insights were based on his own military experience and general knowledge rather than privileged access to current royal or government thinking. However, the palace's security advisors made clear that the ambiguity itself was problematic, as it created opportunities for misunderstanding and potential exploitation by foreign intelligence services or other hostile actors. Even if Andrew had never intended to compromise security or royal neutrality, his activities had created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by others with less benign intentions. By the end of these confrontations, Camilla felt emotionally drained and deeply disillusioned. The family members she had loved and trusted had revealed themselves to be either calculating exploiters of their royal connections or naive accomplices in schemes that had jeopardized the monarchy's reputation and her own position as queen consort. The realization that she had been blind to these activities for years made her question her judgment and her ability to protect the institution she had pledged to serve. The decision to formally bar Camilla's family members from royal functions and events came after extensive consultations with palace legal advisors, security experts, and senior members of the royal household. Charles had hoped that the confrontations with her relatives might lead to voluntary admissions of wrongdoing and commitments to cease their problematic activities, which could have allowed for a more measured response. However, the mixed reactions of denial, justification, and incomplete acceptance of responsibility made clear that more decisive action was necessary. The formal announcement was crafted carefully to balance the need for transparency with the desire to minimize public speculation and media frenzy. Rather than releasing a detailed statement about the specific allegations and evidence, the palace issued a brief communication indicating that certain family members would be stepping back from royal functions to focus on their private business interests. This language was intentionally vague, designed to signal serious consequences without providing tabloid newspapers with inflammatory details that could dominate headlines for weeks. However, the brevity of the announcement only intensified media interest and speculation. Royal correspondents and investigative journalists immediately began seeking additional information about which family members were affected and what had prompted this unusual decision. The palace's refusal to provide additional details beyond the official statement created an information vacuum that was quickly filled with rumors, theories, and increasingly sensationalized reporting. Within hours of the announcement, photographers were stationed outside the homes and businesses of Camilla's family members, seeking comments or photographs that might provide clues about the situation. Mark Parker Bowles found himself surrounded by journalists when he attempted to leave his London office, while Tom Parker Bowles was forced to cancel several planned restaurant reviews and public appearances to avoid media attention. Annabelle Elliott's interior design business received dozens of calls from reporters seeking statements about her relationship with the royal family and any changes in her business operations. The media attention placed enormous pressure on all parties involved. Camilla's family members were thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, facing questions they could not answer without potentially revealing damaging information about their activities or conflicts with the royal family. Meanwhile, Camilla herself was subjected to intense scrutiny as royal watchers attempted to gauge her reaction to the restrictions placed on her relatives and speculated about the impact on her marriage and position. The psychological toll on Camilla during this period was severe. She had always been a private person who valued her family relationships and took pride in her ability to bridge the gap between her previous life and her royal responsibilities. The realization that her family members had exploited their royal connections for financial gain felt like a personal failure and a fundamental breach of the trust she had placed in people she loved. The restrictions implemented by Charles were comprehensive and immediate. Camilla's family members were removed from the guest lists for all upcoming royal events, including traditional gatherings like Christmas celebrations and family birthday parties. They were also prohibited from using royal titles or connections in their business activities, with the palace legal team monitoring their marketing materials and public statements for any unauthorized references to their royal relationships. Perhaps most painfully for Camilla, the restrictions extended to informal family gatherings and private celebrations that had previously included her relatives. Charles had decided that maintaining clear boundaries was essential to prevent future misunderstandings or opportunities for exploitation. This meant that family occasions that Camilla had cherished, such as birthday dinners and holiday celebrations, would need to be restructured to exclude her blood relatives while including only those with formal royal status or official roles. The implementation of these restrictions required coordination across multiple palace departments. Security teams needed to update access lists and protocols to ensure that excluded family members could not use previous authorizations or relationships to gain entry to royal properties. Communications staff had to brief all royal household members about the new policies to prevent inadvertent invitations or interactions that could undermine the restrictions. Financial investigators continued their work to ensure that all problematic activities had been identified and that appropriate steps were being taken to prevent future incidents. This included monitoring the business activities of the excluded family members to ensure compliance with the restrictions on using royal connections for commercial purposes. The palace also worked with legal authorities to determine whether any criminal charges might be appropriate, though the preference was for private resolution rather than public prosecution. The emotional impact on Camilla became increasingly evident to palace staff and family members who interacted with her during this period. Colleagues noted that she appeared withdrawn and distracted during official engagements, struggling to maintain her usual warmth and composure when dealing with the public and media. Her private secretary reported that she was having difficulty sleeping and eating, and that she required additional support to manage her royal duties effectively. The strain on Camilla's marriage to Charles also became apparent as they navigated the conflicting demands of personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. While Charles remained committed to the decisions he had made, he was deeply saddened by the pain his actions had caused his wife. Their private conversations during this period were described by those close to them as painful and sometimes tense, as they struggled to reconcile their roles as husband and wife with their duties as king and queen consort. Camilla's attempts to maintain contact with her excluded family members were particularly challenging. She wanted to provide them with emotional support and to preserve whatever family relationships were possible under the circumstances. However, Charles had made clear that any such contact needed to be limited and carefully managed to avoid sending mixed messages about the seriousness of the restrictions or creating opportunities for her relatives to seek reinstatement through personal appeals. The excluded family members responded to their situation in different ways. Mark Parker Bowles hired a public relations firm to manage media inquiries and began exploring legal options for challenging the restrictions, though his lawyers advised him that the royal family's right to control access to their events and properties was virtually absolute. Tom Parker Bowles issued a public statement expressing regret for any misunderstandings about his business activities and announcing his intention to focus exclusively on his writing and criticism without any reference to his royal connections. Annabelle Elliott's response was more private, reaching out to Camilla through intermediaries to express her remorse and to seek understanding about the decisions that had been made. Her attempts to communicate directly with her sister were largely unsuccessful, as Camilla was struggling with her own emotions and was following Charles's guidance about maintaining appropriate distance while the situation stabilized. Andrew Parker Bowles took a characteristically pragmatic approach, quietly winding down his consulting business and withdrawing from activities that could be perceived as exploiting his royal connections. His military background had taught him the importance of following orders and accepting consequences, and he appeared to understand that challenging the restrictions would only create additional problems for everyone involved. The broader implications of the restrictions began to emerge as other members of extended royal family networks reassessed their own activities and business relationships. The decisive action taken against Camilla's family members sent a clear message throughout royal circles that commercial exploitation of royal connections would not be tolerated, regardless of family relationships or previous acceptance of such activities. Palace staff noted that the king's handling of this crisis had established important precedents for how similar situations would be addressed in the future. The willingness to prioritize institutional integrity over personal relationships demonstrated a commitment to maintaining public trust in the monarchy that had sometimes been questioned in previous generations. However, the personal cost of these decisions, particularly their impact on Camilla, remained a source of ongoing concern for those close to the royal couple. The crisis also highlighted the complex challenges facing modern monarchies as they attempted to balance traditional roles with contemporary expectations about transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct. The royal family's need to maintain public confidence while managing private family relationships created tensions that had no easy solutions and required constant vigilance to prevent future problems. As the immediate crisis management phase concluded, both Charles and Camilla began to contemplate the long-term implications of the decisions that had been made and the changes that would be necessary to prevent similar situations from arising in the future. The experience had tested their marriage, their commitment to the monarchy, and their understanding of the sacrifices required by their public roles in ways that would influence their approach to royal duties for years to come. The final confrontation that would define the entire crisis came on a gray December morning when Camilla received word that photographers had captured images of her sister Annabelle attempting to enter Buckingham Palace through a service entrance. Despite the clear restrictions that had been put in place, Annabelle had apparently convinced a sympathetic staff member to allow her access so she could make a personal appeal to her sister. The breach of security protocols triggered an immediate response from palace guards and resulted in the heartbreaking scene that would become the defining image of this royal family crisis. Camilla was in the midst of reviewing her schedule for upcoming Christmas engagements when her private secretary informed her of the security incident. Without waiting for official protocol or approval from Charles, she rushed to the palace courtyard where Annabelle had been detained by the royal guards. What she found there would haunt her for months to come and forever change her understanding of the cost of royal duty. Annabelle was standing between two imposing guards in their formal red uniforms, her face streaked with tears and her usual composure completely shattered. The woman who had always been Camilla's closest confidant and strongest supporter appeared fragile and desperate, pleading with the guards to allow her just a few minutes to speak with her sister. The contrast between the guards' stoic professionalism and Annabelle's emotional desperation created a scene of profound human drama that captured the essence of the entire crisis. When Camilla appeared in the courtyard, Annabelle's relief was immediately apparent. She rushed toward her sister, only to be gently but firmly restrained by the guards who were following their orders to maintain the established restrictions. The physical barrier between the sisters, enforced by uniformed guards, served as a powerful symbol of how institutional demands had superseded family bonds and personal relationships. Annabelle's pleas were both heartbreaking and revealing. She insisted that she had never intended to exploit her royal connections and that her business activities had been misunderstood and misrepresented by the palace investigators. She begged Camilla to intercede with Charles on her behalf, arguing that their sisterly bond should count for something in determining her fate within the royal family. Her desperation was evident as she promised to cease any business activities that could be perceived as problematic and to accept whatever monitoring or oversight might be required to restore trust. However, Camilla found herself in an impossible position. As queen consort, she was expected to support her husband's decisions and to prioritize the monarchy's interests over her personal relationships. As a sister, she felt compelled to provide comfort and support to Annabelle during what was clearly one of the most difficult experiences of her life. The conflict between these roles created an emotional paralysis that left her struggling to respond appropriately to either set of expectations. The presence of the palace guards added another layer of complexity to the confrontation. These men had sworn oaths to protect the royal family and to follow orders without question, regardless of their personal feelings about the situations they encountered. They had been instructed to maintain the restrictions on Annabelle's access, but they were also witnessing an intensely personal family drama that challenged their professional detachment and emotional resilience. As the conversation between the sisters continued, it became clear that the restrictions imposed by Charles had created wounds that might never fully heal. Annabelle described feeling abandoned and betrayed by the very family she had always supported and celebrated. She spoke of the humiliation of being excluded from events and gatherings that had been central to her identity and sense of belonging. The financial impact of losing clients who no longer viewed her as connected to royal circles was significant, but the emotional cost of family rejection was far more devastating. Camilla's response revealed the depth of her own internal struggle. She attempted to explain the institutional pressures that had driven Charles's decisions while acknowledging her understanding of Annabelle's pain and sense of injustice. She described the impossible position she found herself in, torn between loyalty to her husband and duty to the crown on one side, and love for her family and desire to maintain personal relationships on the other. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Clive Alderton and several other senior palace officials who had been alerted to the security breach. Their presence immediately escalated the formality of the situation and made clear that Annabelle's unauthorized entry would have serious consequences beyond the emotional confrontation with her sister. The officials' professional demeanor and obvious concern about protocol violations underscored the institutional nature of the crisis and the limited flexibility available for personal considerations. Sir Clive's handling of the situation was both tactful and firm. He acknowledged the family relationship between the sisters while making clear that the security protocols existed for important reasons and could not be violated regardless of personal circumstances. He offered to facilitate a formal meeting between Annabelle and appropriate palace officials to discuss her concerns, but emphasized that any such meeting would need to follow proper procedures and could not circumvent the restrictions that had been established. The offer of a formal meeting only highlighted the transformation in family relationships that had resulted from the crisis. What had once been casual family interactions requiring no special arrangements or oversight had become institutional processes subject to security reviews and official protocols. The bureaucratization of family relationships represented one of the most painful aspects of the entire situation for everyone involved. As palace security prepared to escort Annabelle from the premises, the emotional climax of the confrontation finally arrived. Camilla, overwhelmed by the accumulated stress of weeks of family conflict and institutional pressure, began to cry openly in front of the assembled guards and officials. Her tears were not just for the immediate situation with Annabelle, but for the loss of family relationships, the strain on her marriage, and the recognition that her role as queen consort would forever require sacrifices that she had not fully understood when she accepted the position. The sight of the queen consort crying in front of the palace guards created an unprecedented situation that challenged everyone present. The guards, trained to maintain professional composure in all circumstances, struggled with their response to such a personal and emotional display from someone they were sworn to protect and serve. Palace officials who had dealt with numerous royal family crises found themselves unprepared for the raw emotion and family drama that had erupted in such a public setting. Annabelle's response to her sister's tears was to renew her pleas for understanding and reconciliation. She attempted to reach Camilla despite the guard's presence, creating a scene that perfectly captured the conflict between institutional requirements and human emotions that defined the entire crisis. The physical restraint necessary to maintain protocol while family members expressed their deepest feelings about separation and loss created images that would remain embedded in the memories of everyone who witnessed them. The resolution of the immediate confrontation required Charles's direct intervention. When informed of the situation, he made the difficult decision to come to the courtyard personally to address both his wife's distress and the security breach that had precipitated it. His arrival brought the full weight of royal authority to bear on the situation, while also providing an opportunity for him to demonstrate his support for Camilla during her moment of greatest vulnerability. Charles's handling of the situation revealed both his commitment to the institutional decisions he had made and his understanding of their personal cost. He provided comfort to Camilla while maintaining the boundaries that had been established around her family members. His ability to balance these competing demands demonstrated the leadership skills that had enabled him to navigate the crisis successfully, even as it exacted a significant emotional toll on his family relationships. The aftermath of this confrontation marked the beginning of a gradual process of acceptance and adaptation for all parties involved. Camilla slowly came to terms with the reality that her role as queen consort required sacrifices in her family relationships that she had not fully anticipated. Her excluded family members began to understand that the restrictions imposed on them were permanent, and that their future interactions with the royal family would be fundamentally different from their past relationships. The crisis ultimately strengthened the monarchy's institutional integrity while extracting a significant personal cost from those involved. Charles's willingness to prioritize royal duty over family harmony established important precedents for future situations while demonstrating the personal sacrifices required of those who serve the crown. For Camilla, the experience provided a harsh but necessary education in the absolute demands of her royal role and the limitations it placed on her personal autonomy and family relationships. The image of Queen Camilla crying before the royal guards became a defining moment that captured both the human drama and institutional requirements that characterized modern monarchy. It served as a reminder that behind the pageantry and protocol of royal life lay real people facing impossible choices between competing loyalties and conflicting responsibilities. The resolution of this crisis would influence royal family dynamics for years to come, establishing new boundaries and expectations while leaving emotional scars that would require time and patience to heal.